If you want to avoid costly mistakes at the poker table, listen up. I'm about to run through 5 cash game situations in which you should basically never c-bet on the flop. Situation number 1 is on middling flops when you're out of position. Let's jump right into a hand example. Let's say you're playing a 100 big blind deep cash game and you raise it up from the hijack position. That's 2 before the button. The player on the button calls and the flop comes 9-8-6 with 2 diamonds. The best and simplest strategy on this flop is to check with your entire range. If you're c-betting this board very frequently, you are probably flushing money down the toilet. Let's dive into the Lucid Poker trainer and examine why that is. The first thing that jumps out about how the solver plays this spot is a lot of green. That means check. You can see that even though the out-of-position preflop raiser is the player who can have hands like aces, kings, and queens, this board is still checked 100% of the time. Whether we flopped a straight, a set, or have completely missed with a hand like ace-queen, we are checking on this flop. The player on the button's range is strong and condensed, and in particular, a lot of the range is bunched around these middling cards. Of course, this is a solver's preflop range, and your real-life human opponents might not play exactly like that. In fact, they probably won't. But they are likely playing very similar hands in terms of characteristics. They're probably really liking their suited connectors, they're probably really liking their pocket pairs, they're probably liking their suited high card hands like King 10 suited, Jack 10 suited, and all of these types of hands really smash this board. In fact, you'd be pretty hard-pressed to find many hands that the button can have that have actually missed this flop. The strategic takeaway here is to play very passively on these middling flops when you're out of position, even when you were the preflop raiser. And I'm going to do a little experiment in the Lucid Poker trainer to show you how true this rule is across various different boards. I'm going to set up a custom drill where once again we raise from the hijack and the button calls, everyone else gets out of the way, and then I'm going to do a flop filter where the top card is a 9, and I'm not going to specify anything else. I'm also going to exclude paired flops and trips flops, because those are kind of a different category that's outside of the scope of this video. Now we are going to update and start the drill. Because of the filters I set up, we're going to get a 9-high flop every single time, and here's the experiment. I'm going to check every single time and see how many mistakes we make. All green here indicates that we were correct to check. A little bit more of the red color here. All green, should have checked like we did. Mostly check, but there's that sliver. Just do a few more here to reinforce this. I think you get the idea. We had all different types of hands there. We had a straight and a flush draw. We had an overpair. We had missed hands. And yet, no matter what, the correct play is overwhelmingly to check. I could do this all day. So do yourself a favor on these types of middling flops. Start with a check when you're out of position and go from there. There is one specific exception to this, which I'll talk about at the end of the video. Situation 2 to rarely c-bet is on low connected flops when you're in position versus the big one. Once again, we've got a hand example, 100 big blind deep cash game, and we raise from the hijack position again. This time it's the big blind that calls, and the flop comes 7-6-4 with 2 clubs, which the big blind checks. Back inside the Lucid Poker trainer, and we can see instantly that this flop is so good for the big blind's range, the solver actually leads out a whopping 52% of the time. But most of your opponents probably aren't doing that. That matters a lot. Let me show you why. We are now inside our internal development version of Lucid that only our staff has access to, because I want to show you some experimental sims that we've been running. This sim pack is meant to provide our members with a super simplified strategy that's easy to execute. In these simplified sims, we did not allow the solver to ever lead out into the preflop aggressor. So now we're back on that 7-6-4 board, and we can see that the big blind didn't even have the option to lead. He could only check. So now he's forced to check with 100% of hands. When the big blind checks with all of his hands, we can see how the in-position player responds, and it's with an outrageously passive strategy, checking 92% of the time. Since your opponents probably aren't leading out from the big blind nearly as often as a solver would, you should adopt a strategy that's very similar to the one here on screen. Once again, there is a key exception to this that I'll cover later on. So, next time your preflop raise is called by the big blind and the flop comes 3 low cards like this that really smashes their range and doesn't connect well with yours, do yourself a favor and check back frequently. Situation number 3 is basically whenever you're out of position in a multi-way pot. This is a critical one for you live players out there. When you raise and get called by 2 or more players, you should play quite passively on the flop. This includes flops that are good for your range, like Ace-King 9. That's a board that connects pretty well with you, doesn't hit them so hard. But you can still bet sometimes on those types of high card flops. However, if the flop is less favorable, you should lean towards checking 100% of the time. Trust me that your life will be so much easier this way. Here's a quick story to reinforce that. A couple years back, when Doug Polk and our group of friends bought the Lodge Card Club, he was getting absolutely wrecked in the crazy Texas games. I think he was stuck something like $200,000 playing mostly 5-10 games. Yeah, there was a straddle on sometimes, but that's an outrageous amount of money to be down at those stakes. His loose, aggressive style just didn't carry over from his usual heads-up games. Those Texas players are loose, they like to call, they like to play hands, they like to see flops, they don't really like to fold, and that was kryptonite against Dougie P. In an attempt to stop the bleeding, he connected with Upswing poker coach Ori Peleg and asked him for advice for playing these splashy ring games. Ori shared his #1 tip for these types of games, and that is to never bluff the flop multi-way. It doesn't matter if you've got an open-ended straight draw, if you've got awesome blockers. No, do not bet on the flop unless you have something in a multi-way pot. While that's certainly a simplification, it's great advice and it worked out really, really well for Doug. He didn't fully go that way. He's Doug Polk after all. He loves playing hands, he loves bluffing, he loves being aggressive. So this simple advice really helped Doug turn it around. He made an epic comeback in the non-live streamed games. He's now a winner, and he's also the biggest winner on the Lodge live stream. By the way, I want to quickly note that it's my pleasure to bring some extra lucidity to your c-betting strategy. Do me a favor and smash the life out of that like button and subscribe if you want to see more from us. Also, I'm curious if people out there would want to see a tournament version of this video, or perhaps a video on how to play after checking in these situations. Let me know in the comments down below. Situation number 4 is when you get a low connected flop out of position in a 3-bet pot. For example, once again, we're at a 100 big blind cash game. This time the player in the cutoff position raises, you 3-bet from the small blind, so you're out of position, and the cutoff calls. The flop falls 6, 5, 4 with 2 clubs. This is actually a very similar mechanic to spot number 1. Just like in spot number 1, on this flop, our opponent's range is very strong and condensed. They have a lot of suited connectors and pocket pairs that we're much less likely to have. They have a lot of different possible flush draws, or 2 overcards with a backdoor flush draw. In other words, hands that aren't going to fold to a bet. They also have the nut advantage. They're more likely to have a straight with 8-7. They're more likely to have a set with 6s, 5s, and 4s, and they're more likely to have 2-pair with the suited connectors that have smashed this flop. Meanwhile, if we toggle back to our range, we can see that over half of it is unpaired overcards. When the setup is this unfavorable, you have to start with a check with the vast majority of your range, or simplify your strategy by checking every time. Lucid would have us check 85% here, but personally, unless I had a read on my opponent that steered me otherwise, I would opt for the simplified approach of checking with all of it. That brings us to situation number 5, medium connected flops when you're in position in 3-bet pots. Our example hand is once again from a 100 big blind cash game. The player in the hijack position raises, and you 3-bet from the cutoff, which the hijack calls. The flop is 8-7-6 with 2 diamonds, and the cutoff checks. Now this is a very similar mechanic to spot number 2. Remember when the big blind was supposed to lead out with a large percentage of their range, but most humans don't do that, so that changes how we play when it comes to c-betting. That's what happens in this situation as well. It's just a 3-bet pot instead. First, let's take a look at a standard solver output for this situation, the quote-unquote GTO strategy. We can see here on this 8-7-6 flop, the hijack's range is so strong, it hits this board so hard that he should lead out most of the time, a whopping 85% of the time, in fact. That's significantly higher than even that big blind example in situation number 2. By leading out with his numerous nutted hands like 10-9 suited and pocket 8s, in addition to some bluffs like ace-queen offsuit and some semi-bluffs like jack-10 suited, he puts you on your back heels right away. Imagine being the player who 3-bet preflop and then facing a small lead with a hand like ace-king or ace-jack. It's just brutal to deal with this play. But thankfully, most of your opponents won't be savvy enough to do that. And if you're up against one of those opponents who will never or rarely lead out, you should respond by checking back every single time. We are back inside our internal staff version of Lucid, looking at our experimental, super simplified sims, where now the hijack player, the guy who called our 3-bet, is never allowed to lead out. He's forced to check 100% of the time. And when that's the case, when the hijack is forced to check with all those strong hands like 10-9 and pocket 8s, we can see that our play as the player in the cutoff is to check back 100% of the time. Take that free card and just be happy we have the opportunity to do so. Whether we have aces, jacks, or total miss like king jack, or even a hand like pocket eights that has actually smashed this board. We check it back and go to the turn ready to battle. As promised, before we wrap up, I want to tell you when you should ignore some of the advice in this video. Have you ever played against a truly weak opponent? Someone who you just know isn't going to challenge you with aggressive raises or try to take the pot away on a later street. When these ABC players raise, it's simply because they have a monster. When you're up against these types of players, you can still consider firing that C-bet, especially if you're in position. They're just not going to punish you for it, and you're probably going to over-realize your equity. It's especially important against these players to bet when you have a strong hand with which you want to build the pot. These type players aren't going to do the betting for you, so you have to build the pot ASAP if you want to win a big one. The key exception for the exception is in multi-way pots. I highly recommend sticking to a mostly check strategy when you've got multiple different players to worry about on an unfavorable flop. Want a simple strategy that will help you crush overly aggressive opponents at the poker table? I'll throw the next video you should watch up on screen now, right about here, right? Yeah, should be about there. Give it a click.